Hello, everyone. Welcome or welcome back to the Dan Nessel Show. I'm your host, Dan Nessel. Today we're going to talk about some topics that I really like to talk about a lot on the show. A lot of things related to personal development, digging into neurochemistry, a little bit into storytelling, getting into some ideas about self-awareness. It sounds like a lot, but that's because my guest today can handle it. He is an accomplished business coach, a public speaker. He learned in the crucible of selling how vital the way we communicate is to our success. He's the author of the 3 Conversations for Managerial and Leadership Success. Please welcome Mr. John Gies. I met John a couple months back, as I meet a lot of people these days, on LinkedIn, electronically, virtually, because, we're all locked down still. And probably by the time this podcast comes out, I'm pretty sure we still will be, judging by the way that everything is going these days. But interestingly enough, through the lockdown, through this whole inward-focused, staying at home, working remote journey, I've met more people than I ever have in my entire life in a short period of time. And John is one of these folks who I connected with. And, we hit it off. We had a great conversation. And, that's why he's here today on the show. And now John and we started talking about coaching. That's the main thing. That was the thread that kind of connected us. I reached out to him because he's an experienced executive coach and leadership coach, and helps businesses to basically be better businesses, helps business owners to be better business owners. And that owes a lot to his deep background in sales, coming into the coaching world. What was it, roughly about a decade ago, John? Is that how long you've been?
Close. Yeah. When we were talking earlier about LinkedIn and 20 years, I'm like, oh, shucks, I'm that old.
Well, that means we're both that old, which is crazy. It's something that's come up a lot lately, this whole how long have you been on LinkedIn thing, because so many people are now, I think, flocking to the platform for business, and it's accelerated because of COVID, where there are a lot more solopreneurs, a lot more people who are, working for smaller outfits, and they're looking at LinkedIn as their main avenue for reaching out to people. And hey, I'm no different. So I get it. But it's pleasant to see that much activity these days.
Well, but I do it differently, Dan. I get 2 or 3 emails a week in my inbox that say, hi, John, buy my stuff. And I'm afraid of what that will do to LinkedIn over time. But you did it well. We actually fostered a conversation.
Oh, God, yeah, because we weren't selling, right? And we'll get in. I think we should get into that a little bit in a few minutes. But when you're out to build relationships, build relationships. If you're out to sell, sell. But it's not that easy to put those two things together in a natural way unless it is you're so authentically you, and that's just the natural way that everything goes. I wish I knew how to make that happen for myself, but I'm not really selling a product except for myself anyway. So it's something that's come up a lot these days. I think you've hit on something pretty important, John. But I wanted to start, that was a very long kind of, intro how we kind of know each other. But I wanted to really start by asking you an interesting question about your background. Because last time we talked, you were talking about how you've actually have a pretty good view of the world, or at least, the many places that you've lived, because you've lived in many places, 15 cities. Is that right?
That's correct. 15 cities, 17 times. So I was born at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, left in swaddling clothes and toured the Midwest as my dad was growing his career. I went to grade school in Kansas City, high school in Buffalo, and college in Minneapolis. And then I embarked on my own career. And so I've lived in Minneapolis twice and here in Denver twice. Met my wife here in '88, moved away immediately, went through 6 cities in 10 years. And then we moved back here, and my experienced executive assistant used to call her the saint because she was willing to move with me.
It takes a lot to move once. It takes an incredible person to move twice. 3 times, I think you're basically pushing divorce, for most people. But to have family that can go with you and move around with you is, I think, is definitely a blessing.
Well, we're blessed with no children, and my wife will tell you that. And part of why we are so close, we're celebrating 30 years this year.
Oh, congratulations!
When you move to a new city and it's just the 2 of you, You are each other's best friend. And we did that at the very beginning of our marriage. So we're like each other's best friend.
Every move is like going through a crucible in some
Mhm.
ways.
Yep.
So do that with somebody and you come out the other end better or totally fried. It depends.
Right.
But luckily you've come out better. So you have a fairly though broad view of the audiences that you work with as a coach. So how'd you get into coaching? How'd that all happen?
2008, I hired a coach. I was frustrated with my job, kind of thought something would change or I needed to make a change. And during the course of that period of time, I found that I liked really three things about lots of things, but three things really stood out. I loved speaking in front of the room. I'd been a Toastmaster for 15 years, 11 years at that point. I really enjoyed facilitating that difficult conversation around the sales table where you're trying to get the client, the operations people, your IT people all come to an agreement. And I really liked mentoring and training my team. And so I looked at what my coach did and said, maybe that's something I want to do. But like many things, I had a pair of golden handcuffs. I was making a pile of money and kept moving through the industry. We were bought the company I was with was bought in 2010. And the company that bought us destroyed the company. Within 18 months, we had lost 85% of the clients that they bought. So it's like, why would you buy the company? I still don't understand that. But I looked around, I went to another couple of companies in my industry, and it just, the magic just wasn't there anymore. So I took a step back to think about what I wanted to do and thought back to the work I'd done with my coach. What was I good at? What did I like to do? How could I do that? So I got certified. I did some contract work, teaching sales training, negotiation skills, presentation skills, and then coaching sales managers on how to manage their teams. And that's how I got to tour a variety of countries. And then when their business dried up, I went into business for myself. And this goes back a ways. Bud Gordon was my instructor at Normandale Community College. And to get a B in Bud's class, you had to get all the points required for an A and read one personal development book. To get an A, you had to read two. I read one. It was called The Magic of Thinking Big by David Schwartz. And I was off on a path to get better, personal development, personal achievement. And I've been touched by so many people that have helped me elevate my life. At this point in my career, it's my pleasure. And I get inspired as I see people shift and change as we have conversations.
Do you still bring like the magic of thinking big? Is that still like one of your major, I guess, influential pieces that you try to pass along to your coachees?
It's a good question. No, it isn't. Although it should be. It's a great book. And whenever I see someone that has read it, I'm like, oh, yeah. But the one that comes up most often for me is Dale Carnegie's How to Influence and Influence People. And I still have my little golden book. And whenever I meet somebody else that has their little golden book, we get a chuckle. But it's, that was written in 1938, and it's as relevant today as it was then.
I keep saying to people that every time I have a guest, I come off with a reading list. And like How to Win Friends and Influence People has been on my list for some time. I haven't gotten to it yet. That's why I don't have many friends probably. But maybe I'm doing okay on the influence side of things for these days. But it's on my list. That along with, Think and Grow Rich and, these kind of, the classics. And I've read Think and Grow Rich, but I also have, what's his name? Cialdini.
Robert Cialdini.
Robert Cialdini's influence book in my queue right now. So all these wonderful books are often foundational books for people who go into, personal development and coaching and so on. But you've obviously been reading these books and bringing them to your clients and developing your business and, over the years, but you've kind of honed in, I think, a little bit in certain areas over the time that you've been working with clients. And particularly like what I'm really interested in what in your particular work is how you work with your clients on communications, right? And on communication skills and, how that is, at least according to what I'm reading, is critical to their success. How, being a communicator is such an important part of what leaders and what executives do, especially in terms of at the very basic level, being able to communicate what's going on in your business with other people. But I think at a deeper level, actually being able to connect with one another, with your team, with the other folks around you. And it takes very evolved and developed communication skills to do that. So I know there's a difference between those kinds of communications and like the kinds of corporate communications and so on that we always talk about, that I always talk about as a PR person. But I think they're related because the core idea of being able to tell a story and put a few sentences together and convince and influence are common across those various disciplines. But why don't you kind of like go a little bit into that, into your feeling, your kind of theory of communications, how communicating for the bottom line is how you talk about that, how communication influence human and financial performance.
Sure. So it goes back to Dale Carnegie, to be honest. So I was a young executive, and I had a young lady that was a customer service rep that didn't want to do something for one of my clients. So I told her what I thought about her, the job she was doing, and what she should do with the job. And my boss said, "Hey, John, you're not going to get the promotion you moved here for, nor are you going to get the raise that we promised you, because even though you're number 10 out of 94 salespeople, you don't play well with others."
Oh,
So I decided, all right, I need to do something. And that's how I got in, found Dale Carnegie. And what I find is, you can go back to Albert Moravian. A lot of people use these statistics. The words we use are only about 7% of our communication when we're in an emotional context, but it's our tone and even our gestures. And, listen to me, I sound like an old guy. Back in the day, we used to talk about vibes, they just
yeah.
give off a vibe. Well, now we understand that those vibes are neurochemicals. So
Mm-hmm.
if I just show you a slide that shows the word no on it, you will become uncomfortable, kind of edgy, maybe even defensive. And it's because cortisol and norepinephrine and adrenaline have been released. And now your body has hijacked your brain and you don't know why, unless you're aware. So then as a communicator, we say, or as a leader, we say no all the time when we fold our arms, when we huff, when we roll our eyes, when we're
Mm-hmm.
tapping on our keyboard, when somebody's talking to us. So I really want to help people understand that we can communicate the equivalent of yes and turn people's brain on at the frontal part of the brain where they're creative, they're collaborative, they want to work together. And it doesn't take a lot. Like I do an exercise in one of my workshops where I used to have people stand up and smile at each other for 15 seconds. And it changes the dynamic of the room. They're laughing, they're giggling, they're having a great time. I'm like, all right, how long did that take? 15 seconds. So if you tell me you don't have time to engage your people, I'm just going to call BS, belief system on that, because you can just 15 seconds and you can change the dynamic. So it's really helping people understand how they can do better with their teams by using chemistry and communication techniques.
You just said something really interesting, and you are the second person I've ever heard say this. Maybe I'm just not talking to the right people, but you said I'll call BS on that, BS, belief system.
Yes.
Up until very, very, very recently, I thought BS just stood for one thing.
Yep.
And we know what that is. This isn't explicit. This, by the way, is a marked explicit podcast, but we don't have to go there. Just saying, we all know what BS means. But BS now as belief system. So how does one kind of get over their belief system, or how does the belief system get in the way of this idea of communicating better?
I can tell you what it was for me and what I think is the solution. So I grew up in an environment where, it was John Wayne. My dad was a staunch German from Russia. It was, drive. Raising your voice would make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And how did John Wayne solve all of his problems with his fists or his six gun? So raising my voice and telling that customer service rep was what I thought a successful executive would do, because that's the field I was immersed in. But the reality is when the first step, think back to emotional awareness or emotional intelligence. The first step is being aware, and just being aware of how you communicate and how people respond to that. And becoming aware of that, then you get to say, all right, I tried that, it didn't work. Why not? And it's kind of, again, I go back to Dale Carnegie. When you show a sincere interest in other people and really try to understand where they're coming from, like Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand before you try to influence. It really does matter. There's a reciprocity. I think Cialdini talks about this, When I give to you, there's a part of you that wants to give back. So I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, it's okay. It's an interesting conversation because you talked about how your belief system, your BS that you were carrying was basically formed by a kind of strict patriarchal environment and John Wayne,
Yep. Well,
among other things,
right.
right?
That was the world that I was living in, right?
That makes sense. That makes sense. So an executive who is like, who has grown up that way is going to think that, domination, force, strength is the way to get things done. So that's that person's belief system.
Right.
Right. So getting over that is it takes quite a bit of work.
Yes, and it starts with awareness, but it's also you and I were talking about books a little bit ago. I read like 4 or 5 books a month.
Mm-hmm.
And in the course of that, I just finished one called Survival of the Friendliest, which is how like arguably today, a dog lives a better life than a wolf. I mean, luxury, they get petted, they've got beds, they've got food. And it's because they chose to become domesticated. If you look to Franz de Waal and some of the work that he's done on bonobos, there's all sorts of research that shows we as humans, the things that separated sapiens from the rest of the humanoid species was our ability to collaborate and share a story with each other. So knowing that, as finding that and comparing it with the world that I grew up in, where domination was it, and collaboration gets more results. You kind of have to expose yourself to new ideas to change your ideas.
So it kind of sounds, in some ways, that the ability to recognize and tell your story is one of the ways to either navigate around or work within or work with belief systems.
Oh yeah,
is that right?
I think our sense of identity, how we identify. I mean, we can look just to the news right now at how we identify as people and what that does. But as we change ourselves, and one of the questions I have posted over here is, what would a successful business coach be doing now?
Yeah.
And so as I'm going through the day, it's easy to go down a rabbit hole. But if I see that, it reminds me, right, what should I be going down the rabbit hole? So what is the identity? Do they get up and take cold showers? Do they eat potato chips, or do they go for something healthy? Do they make time to exercise like they tell their clients? Do they make time to think for themselves? So it's what's the story we tell ourselves? Because you talked about it earlier. The stories that we tell, stories sell, facts tell, and so we even have to sell ourselves all the time.
Well, that stories sell, facts tell is an interesting way of thinking about it too. It implies that stories don't have to be factual to tell, to sell, which we all probably know is true. But the way that I've been approaching storytelling, or just the idea of story, is more from the brand side of things. You have a company, you have a brand, and you can throw it out into the marketplace and say, this is my brand. It makes the best, orange juice on the planet. Right? It's fresh squeezed. We only use oranges from a specific valley in southern Japan, and whatever down to that. These are facts. But your competitor come on and say, look at these happy, wonderful people, and they're so healthy. They're doing great in their life. This kid is getting all A's. Wait a second, look at that. In the morning, he goes to the fridge, he grabs, what is he drinking? He's drinking our orange juice. But they're not talking about the orange juice. You're talking about the story and the fact that the orange juice is the helper, right? You're setting up the orange juice, your brand, as the thing that is, or the element that is helping these people be better and have better lives.
Right.
Yeah. So that's usually the way that kind of, storytelling comes up in my conversations in my professional world, But in the world of kind of being a better leader and being a better business person, and maybe those are two different things, or no, those are probably the same thing, but among your clients, how could they, or how would they be reframing the stories about themselves in such a way, if there is an easy way to talk about that?
If it's okay, I'll give this 2 answers. One is, how do I differentiate? How do I tell a story about my small business? Because Not every business has the budget to create the brand of a Pepsi or a
Hmm.
Geico.
Of course.
And then there's the story that we tell of ourselves as leaders. So I like working with the left brain professions. They're really good, they're technical, they're spot on, and they often don't have really good communication skills to connect with others. And nothing wrong with it. It's another skill. I'm listening to some work by Tom Bilyeu right now, and he talks about skills that can be utilized, skill utilization. And communication is a skill. I mean, given how powerful it is, I'm stunned at how few people actually practice what they're going to say.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. But it comes down to awareness, really understanding, being aware not only of how I'm impacting the world, but what's going on inside of the leader that's driving that behavior. Because if we're honest, if we raise our voice, if we get loud, it's because something's been triggered in us and we're probably afraid of something. So it's what is that and is that real? Because, Daniel, today, none of us are going to get eaten by a tiger. I mean, very rarely.
No.
The most that might happen is, we'll get a demotion, we might lose our job, but there's another job out there. So it's not life and death. So really becoming aware of that and then saying, all right, is there another way to approach this? And frankly, it's getting out of our comfort zone because our brains are wired, what is it, neurons that fire together, wire together. We get into habits. It's like driving a truck through a field. The first time it's really hard. It's bouncy and jouncy. But over time, the ruts, you can take your hands off the wheel and your truck will go right to the driveway. Well, our brains are similar. So we have to really exercise effort to get out of our comfort zone to try a new behavior. And it's interesting. Not long ago, a few years ago, I was driving to a meeting with a big executive and I was going, who the hell do you think you are to be calling this guy? And I recognized that voice. I said, well, I've done my work. I can do this. And so I went for the close anyway, and ta-da, got the deal.
Yeah.
But so now I have named that voice. I call him Saruman for the wicked wizard from the Lord of the Rings.
Saruman. Yes.
The deceitful wizard from Saruman, or from Lord of the Rings.
With a very deep and mellifluous voice of Christopher Lee.
And I now I'm looking for that voice, so I know that if I hear that, I want to do the opposite of what it says. So it's awareness, and then it's creating like an if-then. If I experience this, then I'm going to do that. So you actually push yourself through that comfort zone a few times, and after a while, it becomes a new habit.
Yeah.
For small companies, the stories that we tell are huge. Most small business owners get up and they say, we're the best, we're the brightest, we have the most experience, we've been in business since 1938. Great. Does that mean the guy that's been in business since 1928 is a better business owner? No. But if you really understand the problem that your customer has and can articulate it, they know you have the answer. And it's not necessarily, I need my house painted, because they've already made the decision to paint their house, but it's what fear do they have about getting their house painted? Are they afraid of the mess? Are they afraid of time? Are they afraid of money? And how can you stand out with that? So again, the way we frame our stories with our audience in mind, whether it's one or many, will determine where our communication and leadership goes.
There's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I love the idea of the Saruman voice. I don't know what we'd call it, and other people. I was just talking about this with somebody on my show, that we have many voices within us. We have many parts.
Yep.
As Dr. Richard Schwartz would say, a wonderful coach named Beth Masterman, she turned me on to something called inner family theory. And the extent to which I understand inner family theory right now is probably the 45 minutes or so I've listened to it so far. So I'm by no means anywhere near qualified to talk about this. But what I will say is, after thinking about it and talking with other people and just getting like the kind of Cliff's notes of it a little bit, is that it's like having multiple personality disorder, but it's not a disorder. You just have lots and lots of, people inside you, parts.
Yep.
It's a family. And you have to know how to manage that family that's inside of you, in whatever way works. And that is primarily by having the strong self being the main character. That's you. When you think of who you are, it's that self. But yourself isn't alone. You have lots of other people. So you have Saruman telling you things, and it seems like you know how to deal with Saruman. You're like, okay, Saruman, I hear you. I'm not going to do that now. I hear you, Saruman, but I'm going to do something different because I know how to deal with you. It's funny. It's even funny saying that. I
Yeah.
hear you, Saruman. But it's fascinating. So anyway, like with respect to telling your own story, and if you're working with a leader or a small business person who is trying to work out what's the story they should be telling to themselves or to their customers. I mean, that's ultimately you're trying to get to how do they do better? Like, what is it that they need to do better? So it just seems that there has to be a lot of great material there where you're talking to your executives and, you are, getting them to understand this about themselves, how to perform better, how to be better. So, getting to their story seems to be one of the things that you're probably focus a lot of your time on.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that one of my most frequently used phrases is, "Did you hear what you just said?" And they often go, "No, what?" And again, if you'd asked me 40 years ago how important self-awareness was, I'd say, who cares? But it truly is a superpower. If you can really be self-aware, and it's remarkable what happens when people hear what they've said. Like this class I taught years ago on presentation skills, we videotaped
Mhm.
them 6 times throughout the day, doing different segments, and the growth that is experienced because you get to see yourself on camera. And you say, "I don't want to do that. I want to do this," and the growth when there's self observation is huge.
Learning how to kind of tell your own story in a different way, or just seeing yourself is probably the best way to do that, because you have a very different opinion of yourself. You have a very different idea of what you are, and it's all about awareness, just like you said. Um, you said something earlier about you know neurons that fire together wire together,
Yeah, right.
right? I like that. So how would somebody then just rewire themselves?
Great question. So there's a book called The Alter Ego Effect. Todd Herman is the author. He's a sports coach. And he describes this, he articulates it better than I can, but essentially you create an alter ego. So for me, I took parts of Teddy Roosevelt, parts of John Wayne, parts of
Mm,
some other folks to say, all right, those are the things that I really admire and want to live into. The
mhm.
thing I like about Teddy Roosevelt was he appeared to be fearless, and he took himself from this weak, sickly child into the bull moose.
Yeah,
He traveled down the Nile River, and if you've ever read about that, you'd say, "Holy shit, I would have just given up."
yeah.
Take me, take me, dear Jesus. I don't want to live through this. But he powered through that. It's like, so I want that resilience. I want that curiosity. I want that enthusiasm. And so crafting the elements that you think can help you move yourself forward, and then who in the world emulates those, so that you can create this alter ego that you can look to, kind of like the opposite of Saruman. To say, all right, so it's like the little red devil and the white angel that were on all the cartoons. You've got
Yeah,
the voice
yeah.
of the ego and the voice of the better. Cultivate the voice of
Mhm.
the better. How would Teddy respond to this? How would my alter ego respond to this? Like Kobe Bryant was the Black Mamba. On the
Yeah.
basketball court, he was a beast. But off the court, he was different because when he stepped on the court, he brought his alter ego to that. So we can create that alter ego.
And that's one way that you can rewire
Yes,
yourself,
because
you're saying?
it's through behavior. So then you say, all right, I'm going to do this. And so I'll give you an example. This, over the next 10 weeks, because we're 2 weeks in, I'm taking a cold shower every day just
Hmm.
because I'm inspired to do something hard. And it is hard. I'm
I'll
up
bet
to
it's
10
hard.
seconds now. but but by doing that, and what I'm finding is that now it's a little bit invigorating. It's still hard,
Mhm.
but there's a chemical change inside, and it's kind of like public speaking. So I've been a speaker for 21 years. And I always tell new speakers that are super nervous, I'm nervous all the time. That just shows that you care. But when you do it a few times and you realize that they're not going to come with pitchforks, all of a sudden you can lean into that and it's okay. So it's like swinging a baseball, practicing a kata, whatever. It's practice will get you to the point where you now have a new pathway. It's like running was terrible until I ran for a while.
You were a runner for a while, you said?
I 1 year for my physical challenge, I decided I would run 5 miles in an hour. And so I got to the point where I did that. It crushed me. So now it's just like I try to get like 2 or 3 miles a day in as part of my exercise routine.
Well, that's pretty good though. I can't run anymore because my knee is shot, but I try to do. I exercise every single day. It's something I started about 2 years ago, and even if it's only 10 minutes, I do something every day. It's usually
our
more
bodies require it.
Got to do it, and keeping fit, physically fit, is absolutely, I think, a prerequisite to making any other achievement mentally and psychologically, certainly, and in business and wherever. I mean, I think you can certainly do well at whatever you do and be in terrible health, but it's not going to last.
No, but we're all one thing, right? We're there's more and more evidence now that the signal from the heart to the brain is faster than from the brain to the heart. And then there's the signals from our gut to the brain. Just like we talked about the word no and yes, our bodies, the chemicals will hijack our brain. And so Amy Cuddy, I think was her name, did some research a while ago on presence. Stand up, get into Superman pose, and you actually raise some neurochemicals in your body so you have more confidence.
Yeah. That's right. I've heard that before.
If we're feeling in a state of not such, like I'm not enough, drop and do 10 push-ups, or stand up and, be Superman. Your body will change, and then the chemistry will change, and you can move yourself into a new state. And other days, you may not feel like moving, but you can, I was reading about the Maori soccer team or rugby team and their haka.
The All Blacks?
Yeah, the All Blacks and their haka.
Yeah.
So you can.
Yeah, that's insane.
Like I did the martial arts for a while, and we would, kia, the aya, and that changes your state. And so they go together.
Yeah. I've seen the haka in person, and it does change the state of everything and everyone around them. It's crazy,
To face that would be intimidating.
Oh, forget it. Yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. And that's half the point they do it, to play those mind games with the opponent, which I guess, we do in one way or another in business and in life all the time. It's a great lesson. But it's interesting because you were talking about you're brushing on this whole neuroscience thing throughout our conversation. And that's something that fascinates me. Goes back to an episode I had with a fellow named Michael Netzley, who was talking about how our brains change as we get older, and he's separated them, or he and his team have figured out very interesting ways to talk about the phases of neurological development. And essentially, as we get older, we have the ability to first become more inwardly, like to focus inward rather than externally, internally focused rather than externally focused. And that happens to a few people, not everybody, but quite a few people go through the stage when you're in your 40s and 50s, myself included, right? And then that kind of gradually becomes this whole thing where you get more and more aware of everything around you, but less and less concerned with details in a lot of ways. So ultimately by the time you're in your 60s, you're like a super innovator. You could be, if your brain chemistry is favors connecting dots that nobody else is seeing necessarily. And by the time you're like in your 70s, you're essentially like a chess master, seeing the board and like knowing where all the pieces are going to go without anybody ever kind of, suggesting it. It's just sort of you start to master strategy more and more, and there's these big picture items. So that as you get older, that your employers should be aware of better ways to access your value, and vice versa. You should be aware of better ways that you can add value. But anyway, where I was going with that is that, you work with people all the time in this area where you're helping them to, to communicate better, to apply neurochemistry principles to communication, and I want to know how you felt about that in your experience with working with people. How does it change as with your clients as they're in different stages of their career, and what do you find to be like standing out to you in that area?
So I heard that as, do I notice a difference in either age or experience in terms of the way people's brains function as a leader? I don't know that I have ever thought about it in terms of age or experience. What occurred to me as we were talking was the comment that you made about how as we get older, some people start to turn inward. And
Hmm.
I call those, ironically, I call those the navel gazers. I am a full-fledged navel gazer. I love looking at my navel, figuring out what's going on. But not everybody does. Not everybody wants to look inside. Some people are just, explode in the world. I'm going to move the world. The world will move based on my intentions. I often encourage people to take time for reflection because we talk about self-awareness a lot, or I talk about self-awareness a lot. Well, we won't become self-aware unless we make time to become self-aware. It might be, what are 3 questions to ask yourself every day? I think Marshall Goldsmith has 6 questions to ask at the end of the day. But it's, what kind of practice can I develop to say, all right, what went well today? What was going on in my mind that supported that? Who was with me? What didn't go well? What was going on in my mind? Where did I not reach out for help where I could have reached out for help? And just simple like that, just 5 minutes at the end of the day, and you will change the way you look at the world within a very short period of time.
Just to clarify, when I said inward focused, I really meant internally focused. And the difference between internal external is that when you're it was best delivered in an analogy Michael gave me, right? When you're externally focused, you're happy to let everything else kind of happen around you in some way, and you are happy to just ride on the
Okay.
bus. But when you're internally focused, you want to be driving the bus.
All right.
So I think it's sort of the opposite almost of how I communicated it before. Sorry, Michael. but that's basically it. If you're internally focused, you want to be driving the bus. Like, people start to look inside themselves and say, I am meant for more than this. And I am, I need to look out for number 1 now. And some people don't get there. Some people are like, I'm happy to be part of the collective. And both of those paths are fine, are perfectly good.
We need all of that. But I think we're all here for a reason. And if we don't lean into what that is, if we don't lean into what we bring to the table, if we consistently hold back our strengths, our talents, because we don't want to work extra hard. I mean, some people just want to go home and have a beer, put up their feet. But if we don't lean in and give the best that we have to offer, at the end of the day, we will be regretful of what we've brought into the world. I think people want to live to their fullest. And when you can step out of your comfort zone, when you can say, I don't know this yet, but I can figure it out. When you can say, I want to take this bus to there. So I read a book, 2008, called Firms of Endearment. It was a good to great comparison of stakeholder versus shareholder companies. And stakeholder companies consider the consumer, the environment, the vendors, the employees, the community, versus just the shareholder. But they also include the shareholder. And these good to great companies outperform the S&P, they outperform the good to great companies, even through the 2008-2009 meltdown.
Yeah.
We can do so much in our business. We spend a third of our life in the workforce. We have such powerful influence there that when we can serve all of that ecosystem, we can change the world versus just trying to get another half a penny to the stock price. So I'm on a mission to change the way we think about that.
How does that fit into your kind of the way that you work with people? Is that where you're talking about the conversations we have with ourselves.
Yeah, so it's all that. So people don't, the work that coaches do, the work that trainers do, it's about changing people's consciousness. Nobody says, hey, can I hire you to change my consciousness? What they will hire you to do is help me grow my revenue, help me get my team to perform, help me get better performance. So there's what you market and what you sell, right? I come in to help small business owners grow. I come in to help teams perform better. But in the process of that, I weave the insights of when you do this and you come at this with a collaborative approach versus a dictatorial approach, you will get a higher performance. And here's the data to support that. Why don't you try this to make that happen? Or else it's how do we think about so change is for all of us, right? And this last year has been a huge thing of change.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's not that people aren't willing to change. They just want to know why and where it's going. They want to have kind of a roadmap. So if we can spell out where we're going, people will gladly follow us to the new world, so to speak. They're looking for a little bit of leadership.
Yeah.
But what I find is a lot of people just say, come with me, and they don't tell you where you're going. It's like saying, let's go to the West Coast, but I'm not going to tell you how we're going to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially if you're, out here in Jersey. It's a pretty far journey. What are the main things that you're hearing from your clients these days? Like you've just mentioned that you just talked about this year that we've had, right? And people want to know, what's ahead. People want to know the journey they're on. Now, right now, we're in this situation where nobody knows, really. I mean, we all have a general idea that we're going to get through all this. And at some point, we'll all get a vaccine, or most of us will, or at some point, we'll all be able to go out and eat outside again and eat in a restaurant like real people. And at some point we'll be able to hug and whatever. But at some point is not an answer, So how are your clients dealing with this? And what are you finding to be, are they asking you for help with this kind of thing? What are you finding to be the issues that are keeping them up at night now?
Yes, and what I'm inspired by is how resilient my clients are. I have one client that their business is down tens of millions of dollars. And the way they've shifted their resources and moved, they're still keeping their staff mostly employed. They've called some stuff back in from outsourcers. I have another client that they extended their hours so that they could stagger their customers, and they're operating at like 87% capacity with most of their staff. So I have an auto guy that is picking up cars, bringing them to the shop, fixing them, sanitizing them, and then taking them home. It's just the ability that we have to be resilient is remarkable. And what's frustrating to me is how many people are just saying, well, I'm just going to wait for this to go over. Because this just really accelerated a lot of trends, like the dining trend. The millennials were saying, deliver my food already. So, all right, so now we have to figure out how to do that. So it's realizing that this is a hard time for all of us and that we still have to move forward. And the things that come out of this, it's like, I love the applause from the stage. I haven't had that in several months. I've toured the country from the comfort of my chair, which is great. I don't miss the travel, but but it's changed. And so, as human beings, our ability to adapt is what makes us the apex. And so we have that in us. And it's just reminding ourselves, and sometimes just having someone say, "Have you thought about this?" or "How else might you consider that?" Mm-hmm. And giving people a chance to clear space in their own mind to look at it from a different perspective. I don't know. I think I answered your question.
Well, it's really more of a discussion. It's a crazy time that we're living in. But you mentioned something really important. It's resiliency. And, you're right. I'm hearing this a lot. And I feel like, any of us who have changed over the last year or so in some way, ultimately, it's going to come down to, a couple of big R words. It's going to come down to resiliency. It's going to come down to reinvention, and probably relevance. If I'm going to do the power of three here, I would pick relevance. But resiliency, reinvention, and relevance. And by the way, I'm writing this down because just like you were saying before, sometimes I'll say something and just completely forget that I said it.
Those are good. That's a good iteration.
Yeah. Luckily, I have the podcast and I can go back and listen to what I've said and be like, geez, I can't believe I said that. But, resiliency, reinvention, and relevance. And, the people that are coming out of this, or that are looking forward to what we hope is going to be a much better 2021, present, what's happened thus far cannot be an indicator of how it's going to go. What do they say? What do investment advisors say? Past performance is not an indicator of future success. So that's I think the way that we have to approach everything moving forward. Like we have to know what's happened, but we can't dwell on it. And that's resiliency and reinvention, is figuring out ways to offer, to serve better, to do different things in this world that we're in. And sometimes that does mean dramatically reinventing yourself, or it means adding. I don't know. I think we're in the side hustle world too. Still, I have a day job, and I have a wonderful job, but I also have my own interests that I want to pursue. And, that's required a little bit of reinvention on my part, but the relevance, making sure that I'm still, connecting with and communicating with my audiences in the right way, and understanding that has to change as they change. These are all really kind of big, heavy ideas, actually.
I would challenge you. I don't know that I would take them as challenging ideas. I mean, it's reality. We've had plagues throughout history.
Fourth R, reality. I like that.
Plagues forever. We've gone through world wars. We've gone through civil wars. The world presents us with challenges. As human beings, we are problem solvers. We move through the world, and it's like the old adage: the tree that grows in the wind is the stronger tree. We grow in response to the adversity, and I don't mean it. It's not always a grind, but even as you think about teams that put effort together are stronger together. It's like if you go through boot camp with someone, that team functions better than a team that just sits around and has coffee once a month. There's something about our shared effort in the world. And I think this is the perfect time for us to share effort, to take all of the things that we could do to make our business better, ourselves better, our communities better, and lean into that.
I like that. I'm adding reality to those three to make it 4 R's. But now that you mention, I appreciate you kind of taking a slightly different perspective on it, because we all think that the time that we're in is the most important time ever, or that it's the most difficult time ever. And frankly, there are plenty of people, millions in fact, who have been really affected in a horrifying way by this past year. There are 400,000 Americans who are no longer with us. There are, at least at the time of this recording, there are plenty of people who have lost their jobs. There's so many people who have had difficult, trying circumstances. But then there are millions, maybe, of folks who have just been resilient, adapted, changed, and are moving forward in new and exciting ways. I hope to count myself among those people. I keep feeling a sense of dissonance, maybe, if not a cognitive dissonance, but a sort of, like an inner conflict, maybe is the right way to put it. Not maybe guilt, because I feel like I've had a good year, and I've discovered so much. And I'm now, I don't know how many episodes into my podcast by the time this comes up, 40 something episodes. And it's something that was a dream of mine for years, and it finally is happening. And, I have a great job, and I have amazing family time now, and I have great friends. So there's a lot of benefit to what we've been going through. And I feel a little bit guilty about that, like to even acknowledge that that's happened. But you know what? That's the reality. The fourth R is that that's actually, that's actually true.
Yes, and it's I don't know whether it's whether it's fate, whether it's the way that you structured your decisions up until this point. There's all sorts of things that happen. But just like you said, there's a lot of people that are out of work. There's a lot of brand new
Yeah.
business that have started as a result of being out of work. My prediction is we'll look back at this time as one of the biggest times of innovative companies coming into the forefront, because as you look again, looking back to history is no indication of future performance. But Disney,
Exactly. Yeah.
IBM, there's so many companies that were founded in the midst of downturns.
Yeah. Oh, and absolutely. I have no doubt that we've only started to see the beginning of the changing landscape of our economy and of businesses that are going to, be out there. Hell, have you been on Clubhouse yet?
I listened to one the other day. I'm not sure it's just not another shiny thing.
Well, by the time this comes out, I'm sure that it will have been several months. But I've just joined Clubhouse, and I'm just astounded by what I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Not from the point of view of hey, this is a new way to do business. It's actually an old way to connect with people. We've been talking about Zoom fatigue. We've been talking about hey, all this virtual stuff. Well, let's go back to voice. Let's just see what happens when we're just talking to each other. And of course, with the technology, you're able to create this, create a platform where you can have essentially a conference that's audio only, that you can just kind of join and listen to people and connect with people and talk with people. Time will tell before the marketers come and ruin it. I don't know. It'll happen. I believe Mark Schaefer when he says that marketers come and ruin things all the time. But it's an example of a business or something that I don't think would have taken off at all in the pre-pandemic world. And folks like you, John, like you said, you miss getting on a plane and going not getting on the plane part, but you miss going out and connecting with crowds and people. I think, and I know that there's thousands of people who are in the public speaking circuit who are in the events and, the keynote speaking type thing that, they saw their business go to zero 8 months ago, from lucrative to zero. That's almost unprecedented in history that quickly. So this they've adapted, and most of people are very resilient, and people are smart. They'll get to where they're going to get to. But this platform is kind of is helping them make a comeback in some ways, or just to show that they haven't gone anywhere. They're still here and they're doing great, and that's the way it is. And they have new ways to communicate. It's just an interesting way to think about things. I agree with you that that we're going to see a lot of different things come out of this. Any other big things coming in the future that you see, John, or that you wanted to mention?
I think we've got another year similar to last year, and that there will be fits and starts coming in this next year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's so much demand still pent up that if you can get through the next 6 months, people will be so eager to get back into the world and to connect with each other physically. Because we're social animals.
Yeah.
That if you can find a way to get through the next 6 months and be there when the market comes back, when the people come back, and if you've got a local business that you can support, a small business owner, buy a gift card, go in and get delivery and takeout. They'll go buy a pound of coffee from your coffee shop instead of going to the grocery store. Little things like that, because at the end of the day, Wall Street's not coming. The government's going to try, but they're going to fumble around like they always do. It's going to be that small business owner on Main Street that makes a difference in your community.
I think you're right, and I totally support that. I love going to keep our small businesses in operation and help them through all this. And I think that's a nice way to wrap this up, John. I really have appreciated talking with you. I think that we've heard a lot about the way that that you can help people, that that the way that we tell stories about ourselves, the way that our brains work when we're communicating with one another. We talked about how things are changing in this economy, and it's been a really fruitful conversation. There's going to be a lot of takeaways. I know that I've written down a bunch of book titles, which is always a positive sign. for my listeners out there, if you want to know more about John, go to www.johngies.com, and it's JOHNGIES. His name will be spelled properly in the title of this episode. You can just go look him up, johngies.com. You can also go find John on LinkedIn. How else can we find you, John?
I'm at ras-squared.com.
Mm-hmm.
I'm on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at jrgeese.
So ras-squared.com, and then Twitter at jrgeese, Gies.
Correct.
Everybody connect with John. First of all, he's such a gent. He mentioned Teddy Roosevelt and John Wayne. If you see John, he's kind of a mix of the two in person. But what an accurate, what an accurate level of self-awareness he's shown by choosing that persona. And I've just had a pleasurable conversation. I think there's a lot to unpack here, and I hope that you all unpack something from this too. So thanks, John. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, Daniel. Great time. Good luck to everybody.
Appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode of The Dan Nessel Show, please head on over to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or the podcast player of your choice to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. And please don't forget to spread the word. Thanks for listening.